Welcome to the NFL Week 16 wide receiver and quarterback matchup grades article. I am Jason Gilbo at jgilbo11. This article is up for premium subscribers over at dailyfantasycafe.com. Is up on the homepage right now. Published this last night. Jumping into things here this week, obviously we have the Saturday games, we have the 2 Monday games, but still a 12-game main slate here, so kind of a lot to go over. As always, if I do miss someone that you were looking at this week or want to know for some of the other games, just give me a heads up. And I can get back to you on stuff like that. Looking at good matchups this week, obviously Golden Tate is someone that I'm kind of keeping an eye on with Cincinnati's banged up defense. I'm going to avoid William Jackson, who's been solid this year in his limited coverage, but with the injuries here, I will be taking a look at Detroit in a contrarian sense this week. They've really struggled against the pass of late, and they haven't really been playing good offenses either. Detroit, the one thing is the upside's been pretty capped this year in terms of really a full potential of the onslaught. It's kind of either been a Marvin Jones game, it's been a Golden Tate game, but I think we can look at Tate this week. Probably a little bit more of a DK play, just given the fact that the points per dollar opportunity is a little bit higher, just given the PPR scoring. But worth a look. Russell, he's played limited snaps this season, 0.48 fantasy points per route run allowed. I don't mind him at his prices. Devin Funchess in a good spot this week if he's actually 100%. That's one thing to kind of keep an eye on. As we kind of head into the week, he was banged up last week. We saw Greg Olsen, Christian McCaffrey basically run the offense. This is another terrific spot here for Funchess if he can get ahead and get healthy. Ryan Smith, 0.41 fantasy points per route runs allowed on 319 routes covered this season. Definitely not good numbers. Funchess' price is in this mid-range where I think you can take some shots on him in tournaments this week. We do need to keep an eye on Keenan Allen. Obviously, the injury last week was carted off, but I expect it to be fine. I expect him to play this week. Obviously, that kind of downgrades, Tyrell Williams just a little bit here, but I still think he's worth a shot in GPPs. Both him and Allen are obviously in excellent spots this week. Both Screen and Burris are subpar corners, both allowing over 0.30 fantasy points per run allowed this year. This is a spot where I think you can look at the Chargers stack this week. Jets defense obviously kind of struggling of late. Offense is going to put the Chargers in good spots here. So I think we can really look at this stack in full potential here. And I think Tyrell is an interesting, obviously, GPP option, while Allen, if 100% healthy, can be trusted in all formats. So good spot for those guys. Another duo that I'm expecting this week to kind of get a full workload is Keelan Cole and Dede Westbrook. Westbrook's price obviously higher on DraftKings this week. It's still only $5,900 against the San Francisco defense that we can gladly just kind of fire away and target. I think we can look at them. Both those corners as well, allowing over 0.30 fantasy points per route run this season. We obviously saw Westbrook just 2 targets last week, but I don't think we see Earns. I don't think we see Marquise Lee. So I do think both him and Cole are going to see a majority of the targets. So in a good spot on the road. Jacksonville, a team I don't mind stacking this week or using as one-offs as well. Jarvis Landry, one of my favorite wideouts this week, should obviously see double-digit targets here in this spot. Steven Nelson, 0.34 fantasy points per run allowed this year out of the slot. We look at Landry, 0.46 on average, 1.71 yards per route run this year. He's been excellent in the red zone. Touchdowns are at a much higher rate this season. I like Landry in all formats. I like him on both sites. Definitely a solid play. Look at Tyreek Hill this week. Interesting GPP option. Going up against Tankersley, a spot that I obviously expect Hill to kind of exploit here. Miami is oddly not giving up a lot of fantasy points this year, but they haven't really been a great pass defense either. I obviously think we see Chiefs go out there at home and put up a crooked number here this week. The play calling changed over the last 2 weeks, back to kind of what we were seeing in those first 5 to 6 weeks of the season. So definitely don't mind going with Hill. A couple other guys in good spots this week. Doug Baldwin, tough to trust. The targets have been down of late, but going to get Anthony Brown here. I do think this is a bounce back spot for the Seattle passing game after a dud last week against the Rams. Brown, pedestrian, corner at best, 0.30 fantasy points per run against. I think Baldwin can bounce back. Josh Gordon's in a sneaky spot this week. Kyle Fuller, guy I don't mind targeting. Obviously, Corey Coleman's going to draw the tougher matchup against Amakumara. 0.30 fantasy points per hour run allowed from Fuller this year. We look at Gordon, 0.39 since returning. That's as much as Fitz. That's as much as Bryant, Baldwin. So Gordon's putting up some pretty solid numbers since coming back. In terms of guys in the mid tier, in the mid kind of matchups where you can't go one way or the other. Robert Woods, obviously back to kind of being the guy in that offense last week. Pretty average matchup here. Dory Jackson, he hasn't been bad. 0.29 fantasy points per run, 62% catch rate. I do think Woods is obviously still a guy that can beat him. They just lost LaShawn Sims. I think that opens the door, obviously, for Watkins if you want to take a dart throw there. Tennessee's passing game is definitely one that I don't mind targeting. So I do think you can look at Woods. I think you can look at Goff and Watkins this week just solely based on these matchups. Marvin Jones, a little bit of a revenge game here. But obviously against Drake Kirkpatrick, I think he's obviously a guy you can take a look at. The problem is here with Golladay kind of healthy, it's kind of taken a few extra targets away in terms of just the ceiling potential there for Jones at his price tag. So I do think, you can limit if you're kind of looking to stack or with Stafford. I think he's in play. We've also seen Ebron come alive here a little bit of late, so that is something to note. But, I do think the Lions are a contrarian way to go. I don't think they're going to be really that popular this week. So, interesting GPP team, stack, one-offs, however you want to play it. Mike Evans, going to get James Bradberry. His price is down across the industry just because his production's been down most of this year. Bradberry's obviously a guy who's, shadowed quite a few number ones this year. He shadowed Evans earlier this season, held him to 5 catches for 60 yards on 8 targets. I still think Evans is obviously capable of beating Bradberry here, so I'm still willing to give him a look. Tampa Bay, obviously a team that, is expected to be down here with Winston. I could see him chucking most of the second half and getting the balls to Evans, and obviously still in the red zone. Given the fact that they just don't have a lot of weapons right now with Jackson, with their tight ends banged up, it's a really limited offense to target. Michael Thomas, kind of in a similar boat here as Evans. I do think he can get some exposure here. He's had some really good success against Atlanta in the past. Going to see Robert Alford this week. Pretty pedestrian wide receiver or cornerback. Not a guy that I shy away from for the most part. It is hard to pay Thomas's price tags right now, but production has been up over the last 5 weeks, so he is a guy that you can look at. Larry Fitzgerald, we'll see Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie this week. Has a lot of an 80% catch rate, 0.27 fantasy points per hour run. It's kind of digging into Fitzgerald when his splits with Stanton. It's not too far off in terms of targets and fantasy points from any other quarterback, going back over the last 4 or 5 years. So, not too worried about him. I do think people will be, but he's actually in a really good spot here this week. I don't mind going that route. And in that same game, Sterling Shepard, it doesn't look like he's going to see shadow coverage from Patrick Peterson, while that could change in-game if Shepard starts to tear them up. But Tyrann Mathieu is a guy who did struggle in coverage last year. He's been better this year. I still think Shepard's a guy that you can look to exploit in this type of matchup, especially if the volume's still going to be sky high with the Giants. So that is one thing to note, but he is worth a look. I think he's a little bit better play, obviously, on FanDuel at 6,700, just given the fact that it is a little bit of a cheaper price. It goes a little bit more compared to DK where he's 66. But don't mind him. Demaryius Thomas, fairly cheap this week. 0.37 fantasy points per hour run this year. Obviously, Breland's not a bad guy to target, but he's not great either. I think you can look at Thomas this week, given his potential volume and at his price tags. We've seen Washington kind of give up bigger games to at least one of the wide receivers of the core. They've kind of done a great job of limiting, 3 of the 4 groups or, and how they go about. So, he'll dodge Josh Norman. Emmanuel Sanders was back at practice. He's going to see Josh Norman this week, not really looking to go his way. Des Bryant is going to see some Shaq Griffin. Griffin's been decent in his coverage, 0.22 fantasy points per hour run. Bryant's upside has just been capped really since Dak has come under center. Also, AJ Green in a pretty tough spot this week against Darius Slay. And I do want to kind of point out, Slay has shadowed quite a few good wide receivers this season. These are the numbers, of shadow that Slay has kind of given up here. OBJ, Julio Jones, Thomas, Antonio Brown, Stephon Diggs. Those are huge, huge numbers. So it gets AJ Green this week. We'll see if that trend can continue. Not a guy that I'm really looking at. If you're building a ton of lineups, sure, you can go for it, but it's also really not that appealing of a spot. The Buffalo game, this is interesting because Brandon Cooks, I could think we'll see some Tre'Davious White, given the fact that EJ Gaines went down with an injury last week. 0.21 fantasy points per route run. White has obviously been one of the better rookie cornerbacks this season. Really, him and Lattimore kind of really taking the league by storm as kind of the next top tier guys, in my opinion. So Cooks, could be in a little bit of a tricky spot. Worth a look in GPPs as always with his upside, but that's about it. A couple slot guys that I'm going to be staying away from this week. Jamison Crowder taking on Chris Harris. Obviously, this Denver team is done, but Chris Harris still been very solid. Not a guy that I like to target, allowing just 0.17 fantasy points per out run. Troy Hill has been solid when on the field this season. 0.20 fantasy points per out allowed. Rashard Matthews had a strong week last week. I mean, I know our optimizer's looking at him again this week. It is a tough spot, but a guy that you can look at. Robbie Anderson's a fade for me this week. Casey Hayward's just absolutely been excellent. 44% catch rate allowed, 0.20 fantasy points per hour run. Great matchup here for Hayward and the Chargers to kind of get after this Jets team. So I'm much more looking at the Chargers defense than I am really anyone against them. Marquise Goodwin against Jacksonville. He's had a couple of really great weeks. Sorry, Jimmy G and the rest of kind of San Francisco here. Not really looking at you this week. Julio Jones expected to see Marshawn Lattimore this week in terms of shadow coverage. Jones is matchup proof. I'm going to get some exposure to Jones. I would not be surprised to see him put up an average game though, and I think for his price tag that we're still expecting 20 plus fantasy points. So if he gets you 15, 16, it's pretty mediocre. So I obviously think you can justify fading him as well, but against Lattimore, he's been excellent this year. 0.15 fantasy points per out allowed. I'm not really looking to go this route outside of a few lineups. So that's it for me. You can head over to dailyfantasycafe.com. This article will be going strong through week 17, through the playoffs as well. Give it a check out on dailyfantasycafe.com. Just give you a quick little look over here as far as what the tables look like and what you're getting in this article. Plenty of other stuff up on the site, cheat sheets, other articles are optimal lineup reviews, stacking, tools. You can obviously go in here and check out all that stuff. Your cheat sheets will be in this dashboard. So definitely go check out the site, at least for the last few weeks, or if you're playing NBA, go check that out as well. And good luck. And for those celebrating Christmas this week, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone out there. And good luck in week 16.